is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Ethiopia's ruling coalition agrees to form a single party ahead of the 2020 elections. Zimbabwe and the European Union have taken steps towards normalizing relations. And escalating violence threatens district council elections this weekend in Hong Kong. Hello and a very warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. Also coming up this hour. In business, Kenya invests $30 million in a state housing plan. And in sports, South African teen Camden McClellan already a star in the motocross scene. We start the program in Ethiopia, where residents of the Sidama region await results of a referendum on a new state. They voted on Wednesday on whether or not to have the southern zone recognized as a new federal state. Since then, officials have been counting votes, with results expected this weekend. An Ethiopian federal state has the power to control its own police, schools, and other essential services. Days of unrest in Ethiopia's southern region in July prompted the Sidama people to push for greater autonomy. Experts view the referendum as a test for a country already dealing with intercommunal tensions. Now, for more on this referendum, we're now joined by CGTN's Coletta Wanjohi in Addis Ababa. Coletta, to begin with, just give us an update on Wednesday's vote, particularly the vote counting process, with reports indicating that results will be out by today.
Well, Lindy, as we're talking right now, vote counting is continuing in the different areas, the different polling stations of Sidama, and as well as the National Electoral Board putting together these votes so that they can be able to announce it tomorrow. We've already got a confirmation from the government Electoral Board saying that tomorrow is when they'll give at least the preliminary results of the Sidama voting that happened on Wednesday. And so far, in some different polling stations, people have been able to see how they voted. And it's also interesting to see that although some people are expecting a big victory for those who are voting to get out of the southern region, there are also some areas where people voted no. But the margin of between those who voted no and yes in some of the particular polling stations is really, really small. So that tells you there's big competition and big expectation. So as of tomorrow, we should be able to at least hear something from the Electoral Board.
And Coletta, what are the implications of creating a new state? I mean, before this vote, some ethnic groups in the region had expressed fears over possible consequences of such a split.
Well, to begin with, the Sidama people, if they choose to create a new regional state, then they'll be able to rule themselves. They'll be able to manage their own security, their own taxes, their own education and all that. There'll be a small regional government, and they'll be able to run their own politics within the regional government. That will be a plus for them, for those who want to feel the autonomy, and they'll be able to at least regulate their own resources as much as they want, and not what was the case before, where they had to wait for the bigger share to be given to the southern region and then get a bit of theirs. But there's also the other side that says now this regional government is going to be formed on ethnical or ethnicity-based issues. So because it is one region, one ethnic group that wants the autonomy. So these are some of the fears that some of the people who are saying that at the moment Ethiopia is going through ethnic clashes, ethnic tensions, and if we have a regional government that is being formed as of an ethnic issue, then it might probably bring more division and also make other ethnic groups want to form regional state within their ethnic divisions and not as a national party, so as a national region. But we wait to see what the Electoral Board will say and see how it goes.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. Coletta Wanjohi joining us there from Addis Ababa. And as she says, the results of that referendum expected, or other preliminary results expected on Saturday. Well, staying with Ethiopia, the ruling coalition has approved the merger of 3 of its 4 ethnic-based parties into a single party ahead of the 2020 elections. The new Prosperity Party is part of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's efforts to unite the country. But one of the parties boycotted the meeting and the vote, saying the move was rushed and undemocratic. The Prime Minister has refuted those claims, saying the merger is a crucial step in harnessing energy towards a shared vision. Abiy hopes his rapid reforms can win over voters alienated by decades of abuse by the ruling coalition before the 2020 polls. Now, Zimbabwe and the European Union have taken another step towards normalizing relations after a meeting of ministers in Harare on Thursday. This was the second round of talks between officials from the southern African country and the European bloc following the launch of the dialogue process in June this year. Farai Makutuya has more on that story from Harare.
There were handshakes, hearty smiles and group photos at the end of a marathon meeting which inched a relationship strained for nearly 2 decades closer towards normalcy. The talks focused on economic cooperation, democratic reforms and sanctions.
We have urged the EU that they can assist us in removing the sanctions or talking to other people who continue to have sanctions with us, and they indicated to us that they have removed most of the sanctions that they had imposed on Zimbabwe, and they have demanded that we share with them the type of effects of the sanctions that we are talking about.
The EU Council is due to review its restrictive measures on Zimbabwe next February, taking into account progress in implementing promised reforms.
We do think from the EU side that progress has been slower than we would have expected, and I think it has been also slower than the government has originally pronounced about how quickly the government would move forward with various reforms. But we had a good, quite detailed discussion about that, and clear indications that further steps on the reform agenda would be taken.
Another meeting is scheduled for June 2020, ahead of which key benchmarks have been set.
These involve such issues such as the follow-up to the recommendations of the Motlanthe Commission report, and also electoral reforms. The Interministerial Task Force is working on them. So we understood, and that we hope that by indeed our next meeting we would have more concrete steps on these issues. We also sent quite clear messages from our side that how we regard the human rights situation, that we would not want to see it further incidents in that account.
The EU says it's encouraged by the establishment of a national political dialogue earlier this year, but has urged all parties to participate in the process. The main opposition MDC has rebuffed invitations to participate in the inter-party talks. Farai Makutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
The African Union Commission chairperson, Musa Faki Mahamat, is in South Africa to brief President Cyril Ramaphosa on his continental role. Ramaphosa will be taking over the role of the AU chair next year following his election in August. Mahamat briefed the South African president on the affairs and procedures of that role. CGTN Sulisan Jamela has more.
President Cyril Ramaphosa was elected at the 32nd African Union Assembly of Heads of State and Government to chair the AU in 2020. He will succeed President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi of the Republic of Egypt. Ramaphosa's term is expected to see the Africa Free Trade Area go live by July. His tenure will also coincide with a wider focus on economic integration, migration, and the role of South Africa and Africa at the United Nations Security Council.
Et nous avons bien entendu les questions de paix, de sécurité et de développement qui sont au menu de cet agenda.
During our meeting, we had an overview of all the issues that are to be dealt with, that is what we expect to deal with. And for example, the theme of next year, which is the silencing of the guns by 2020. And then we have the deepening of the institutional reform that we have already initiated. We have issues of peace and security and development. These are all the issues that will be on the program.
South Africa last headed the AU in 2002 during the former President Thabo Mbeki's term in office. President Ramaphosa will serve a one-year term and will assume the chairmanship at the 33rd Ordinary Session of the African Union in February 2020. During that time, a lot is expected from him, from his African counterparts.
Talks have been very fruitful and it has been very promising, and we are hoping to work together as we have started already, and we are preparing very well the presidency, that is the chairmanship of South Africa, which is very much awaited by the continent, and therefore we hope that this will take us a step further in the implementation of our program.
African Agenda 2063 is expected to be a key focus for Ramaphosa. Agenda 2063 is Africa's blueprint and master plan to transform the continent into a global powerhouse of the future.
South Africa is one of the lead countries in the continent and in the African Union, and it has been at the very basis of the adoption of Agenda 2063 of the African Union. And obviously with President Ramaphosa, we want the implementation of this Agenda 2063 at the political level, at the peace and security areas, development, economic, social development, and also trade for the continent.
As chairperson of the African Union, Ramaphosa will be guided by the AU Constitutive Acts and the rules of procedure in attending to developmental milestones and challenges on this continent. Yolisa Njamela for CGTN in Pretoria, South Africa.
And to the Democratic Republic of Congo now, where hundreds took to the streets in the eastern town of Beni to protest against the killings of civilians by rebels. The protest was held a day after 12 people were killed by rebels suspected of belonging to an Islamist militia group known as the Allied Democratic Forces. CGTN's Chris Ochamaringa has more.
Residents in the eastern DRC town of Beni staged a protest over the killing of their neighbors by militia groups. An attack on Tuesday left at least 12 people dead and several others injured. Local authorities blamed it on the Allied Democratic Forces, a Ugandan Islamist group that operates in eastern DRC. The protesters marched to the office of the UN peacekeeping mission, who they accuse of failing to protect them. But the UN peacekeeping mission spokesperson denied their claim.
We are very aware of the situation. We know that protection of civilians is at the core of our mandate, and it's what we are doing at the present time by supporting the FRDC in their operations and by trying to protect the population living close to the battlefield.
Civil society organizations in Beni say more than 40 people have been killed by militia groups over the past 2 weeks. The locals are demanding the immediate withdrawal of all UN peacekeepers in their area. The UN, however, says it cannot just leave basing on the demand of protesters.
But it's not up to us to decide if we leave or not. It's up to the Security Council or to the government of the DRC to say, okay, it's enough is enough. You should go home because we think that for X reason.
The attacks by the militia groups in Beni have increased since the Congolese army launched an offensive against them at the end of October. The army recently said it killed 25 members of the ADF rebels. Local leaders believe the rebels are killing civilians in retaliation for the military offensive. The DRC president ordered the army to wipe out all armed groups operating in the east of the country early this year. The attacks by the rebels have seriously affected attempts to contain the Ebola outbreak in North Kivu province. Chris Ochamaringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
Right, let's take a short break. Here's what's still ahead on the program. A foreigner arrested on suspicion of possessing unlicensed arms in Hong Kong. And Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vows to stay on despite corruption charges.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. it has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Right, we start in Hong Kong now, where the family of an elderly sanitation worker killed in the ongoing unrest is demanding justice. The 70-year-old man was struck in the head with a brick thrown by a rioter. He passed away in hospital a week ago after suffering from critical injuries. The incident took place when the victim was clearing bricks left outside a metro station in the New Territories. He was struck on the head and immediately fell to the ground. Here's his son expressing his grief during a briefing to the media.
他的死亡非常的突然，所以我感到很难过。
My father's death was too sudden. I feel very sad. I hope the police can solve the case and arrest the murderer as soon as possible. I hope his active duty will be justified and publicized. My father taught me from an early age that people should fulfill their duties despite difficulties. He did what a Hong Kong resident should do. There is nothing trivial about our country or about Hong Kong. I'm so proud of my father. He taught me, if one's tears are not out of love, we don't let them fall.
Meanwhile, a foreign national has been arrested at the Hong Kong International Airport on suspicion of possessing unlicensed ammunition. Police say they found what appears to be 7 shell casings in the man's luggage. The man appeared in a West Kowloon court earlier today. Police are urging people not to pick up shell casings on the streets. Under the Firearms and Ammunition Ordinance, people found in possession of unlicensed arms face a fine of up to 100,000 Hong Kong dollars and a prison term of up to 14 years. Well, the situation in Hong Kong has raised widespread concern in the international community. An activist from Nigeria, Shehu Sani, has said that if the violent chaos continues, the ultimate harm will be on the Hong Kong people's homeland. Sani added that the future of Hong Kong is linked to mainland China. He asserted that the unrest will do little to curb China's development goals.
They have escalated the protests to the level of violence. We have seen how they are burning public buildings, breaking glasses. We have seen how they have occupied spaces and taken up authorities, and unfortunately even some of them raising foreign flags. That is not a civil society protest. In the case of Hong Kong, they are simply inflaming the crisis, and we must not shy away from the truth. Now, you can't destroy Hong Kong and then think that somebody else will come and build it for you. And I do not think anybody will be deceiving himself to think that the protests in Hong Kong will bring the whole of China down, but it will bring Hong Kong down. That is its reality.
Now, in Washington, more testimony from witnesses in the public congressional impeachment hearings against U.S. President Donald Trump. This time, a House panel heard from Trump's former top Russia advisor and a diplomat for Ukraine. Both expressed deep reservations about plans to try and dig up dirt in Ukraine on Trump's political opponents.
Fiona Hill was until recently at the heart of White House policy making on Ukraine. A Russia expert who wrote a book on the psyche of President Vladimir Putin told lawmakers that theories that Ukraine meddled in the 2016 US presidential election were a Moscow-backed conspiracy.
Some of you on this committee appear to believe that Russia and its security services did not conduct a campaign against our country, and that perhaps, somehow, for some reason, Ukraine did. This is a fictional narrative that has been perpetrated and propagated by the Russian security services themselves.
Fiona Hill then described what we've heard all week from impeachment witnesses, a separate Ukraine policy emanating from the White House that sought to pressure Ukraine into announcing investigations against former Vice President Joe Biden and his son Hunter. David Holmes, a career diplomat at the US Embassy in Kiev, said he and many others were aware of this campaign running counter to agreed US foreign policy. He then described a conversation with US-EU Ambassador Gordon Sondland about President Trump's attitude to Ukraine.
I then took the opportunity to ask Ambassador Sondland for his candid impression of the President's views on Ukraine. In particular, I asked Ambassador Sondland if it was true that the President did not give an expletive about Ukraine. Ambassador Sondland agreed that the President did not give an expletive about Ukraine. I asked why not. And Ambassador Sondland stated that the President only cares about big stuff. I noted there was big stuff going on in Ukraine, like a war with Russia. And Ambassador Sondland replied that he meant big stuff that benefits the President, like the Biden investigation that Mr. Giuliani was pushing.
Both witnesses expressed extreme discomfort with what they saw and heard and witnessed covering US policy on Ukraine. Holmes said he'd never seen anything like the Trump-Gordon Sondland phone call. So those were the last two witnesses in 2 weeks of public open hearings in this impeachment inquiry. Where do we go next? Well, if there's no more public witnesses, it's likely the Democrats will move towards drafting articles of impeachment, essentially charges against the president. They will then be voted on in the House and then move for a trial in the Senate. They will then, if they vote 2/3, he will be removed from office. That is unlikely. But given the testimony we've heard over the last 2 weeks, it would be surprising if the Democrats didn't start down that road. Nathan King, CGTN, at the impeachment inquiry on Capitol Hill.
Now, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed to stay in office even after being indicted on corruption charges. He's accusing prosecutors of staging an attempted coup and says the indictment stems from false accusations. CGTN's Stephanie Fried reports from Tel Aviv.
Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu indicted on Thursday evening on counts of bribery, fraud, and breach of trust. He is the first sitting prime minister in Israel's history to be indicted while in office. What happens next? Because Israel has been stymied. There hasn't been an effective government that's been working for or in Israel for almost a year. What happens to a prime minister who's been indicted? Well, there's no precedent in Israel for this sort of case. So legally, he doesn't have to step down. And based on what he told the nation after the indictment was handed down, he defended himself. Bibi Netanyahu talked about all that he's done for the country. He accused the legal system of going after him and of targeting him illegally. The police, the investigators, and on and on. It doesn't look like Benjamin Netanyahu intends to step down. But of course, these are hearings. He could face up to 10 years in jail. The speculation is that he will seek a plea bargain or that he will look for immunity going forward. There will be eventually new elections or nomination of another candidate, and possibly his own party members may say that he's too much of a liability and oust him. But the news here in Israel this evening is that the first ever sitting prime minister is being indicted on criminal charges. Stephanie Fried, CGTN, Tel Aviv.
Well, let's bring you more on this story now. We cross live to Cairo, where we are joined by Dr. Nabil Negm-Eldin. He's an independent researcher and author in international politics. Doctor, thank you so much for your time. We know, of course, that Netanyahu is quite firm that he is not going anywhere. But in your opinion, how would a possible departure of Netanyahu affect Israel's relationship with Africa?
First of all, thanks for having me. It is very much a dark chapter in the Israeli politics. It has never been witnessed before that this failing political system faces three or potential of three a national election in less than 1 year. The failure of Benny Gantz, the red-white party, to form a government has thrown the Israeli politics into a deeper chaos. Now, the President of Israel has initiated the Knesset members to come up with a member of the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, to form a government. And to get that to that point, the Knesset has got to choose or select one of its members, and that selected member should enjoy a 61 vote of the member of the Knesset, which is 120 seats. So now Israel is facing 3 weeks, 21 days. Actually, today is going to be 20 days countdown from today for that period of the Knesset defining the new Prime Minister of Israel. And if the Knesset fails, then we're going to go to another dark chapter on that country's politics.
So a lot of political upheaval in Israel has never been seen before. Doctor, though, in your view, what is the perception of Netanyahu overall? I mean, certainly in Israel, there's a lot of conflict at the moment with regards to the Prime Minister. But what is the overall view of the man himself as a leader in the Arab and Muslim world?
The guy is not actually a quite, what you call it, a decent politician. The Israeli Attorney General has charged the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu with a few serious charges: fraud, breach of trust, and accepting bribes. He is going to face 3 files. The first one called File 1000, the second file is Case 2000, and the third one is Case 4000. That's again an internal issue in Israel. The guy is not a clean politician compared to other Israeli politicians. When it comes to the Arab and Muslim world, he is again another what I can call it very modestly, gangster and cowboy politician. Israel is occupying south of Lebanon, is occupying the heights of Golan of Syria. Israel has already destroyed all the political agreements, starting from Camp David to Oslo agreement with the Israelis. And unfortunately, Israel and that prime minister specifically is capitalizing on the U.S. Blind support to the Israeli aggression. So when it comes to the Muslim and Arab world, I believe very much we are not into that personal side of his integrity, but we are into the unprecedented sort of gangsters, politicians, and politics in that country, which is not abiding with the international law.
Dr. Nabil, thank you so much for that. Much appreciate giving us that perspective there from Cairo. Now, on to Somalia now. The country is mourning after a female activist died in unclear circumstances. Almas Elman is believed to have died on the spot after a stray bullet hit her in Mogadishu's Green Zone area. CGTN's Abdulaziz Bilo has more from Mogadishu.
Police in Somalia say they're investigating circumstances in which Almas Elman, a Somali-Canadian human rights activist and former diplomat, was killed in the country's capital, Mogadishu. Authorities suggest that Almas died from a stray bullet that hit her vehicle inside the heavily fortified airport compound that hosts foreign embassies, United Nations and African Union headquarters.
Almas Elman
was an important person in Somalia. The Criminal Investigation Department has opened an immediate investigation into the latest killing. We have tasked senior experts to commence investigations, and we plan to make the findings public.
Almas served as a diplomat in the Somali mission in Kenya before taking up a new role with the European Union delegation to Somalia. Lawmakers now want thorough investigation into the killing.
We want the federal government to speed up investigation into the incident and highlight the circumstances in which Almas was killed. The location of the attack is considered one of the safest zones. We want to know why and how she was targeted.
Almas comes from a well-known family of activists. In 1996, her father Elman Ali was killed in Mogadishu by unknown gunmen. The family later fled to Canada. Decades later, the Elman family relocated back to Somalia. Ilwad heads the Elman Peace and Human Rights Center. The 30-year-old activist was recently nominated for the 2019 Nobel Peace Prize for her role in supporting disengaged combatants reintegrate into the society. The youngest daughter is also a lieutenant in the country's national army, leading the fight to eradicate extremism in the Horn of African nation. In July, Hodan Nale, a Somali-Canadian social activist, was killed in a terrorist attack in the southern port city of Kismayo. Militant group Al-Shabaab took credit for that attack. A month later, Abdurrahman Omar Osman, a Somali-British citizen, was killed after a female suicide bomber detonated explosives at a security gathering in Mogadishu. Osman was the mayor of Mogadishu and the governor of Benadir region, and a former minister who had returned back to Somalia after years of being an activist in London. Attacks on prominent personalities, mainly from the diaspora, have gone up in recent years, raising fears about the security situation in the East African nation. Since 2013, thousands of Somalis have returned back from Europe, North America, Asia and other Gulf nations to play a role in the rebuilding of their nation. Abdulaziz Bilon, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
Let's go to Senegal now, where China's 18th medical mission is in the southern part of the country, providing free medical services to local communities. Sino-Senegal bilateral cooperation in the health sector dates back to 1975 and has helped hundreds of people get much-needed healthcare. CGTN's Brian Toussaint has more.
Afiniam is a small town in southern Senegal. Many people here are in need of medical relief, from cataract surgery to medication they can't afford.
I come from a neighborhood that is 20 kilometers from Afiniam. I'm here because it's a free medical consultation. It is not easy to have quality care in our area. So I talked to the doctors about my chest and head pains, and after the consultation, I received free medication.
The Chinese 18th Medical Mission is here to assist. The team consists of 13 medical staff from Fujian province.
After hearing the news that the Chinese medical team is coming, the local people were very enthusiastic. We originally planned to have 150 patients on the first day, but now there are more than 200 people on the scene. Although the time will be tighter, our doctors will do our best to provide medical services for the needs of the local people.
The team is made of medical experts including surgeons, pediatrics, and orthopedics. Since arriving in Senegal in August this year, they have completed nearly 10,000 medical treatments and more than 400 operations.
I came here early for the consultation. Many people are here. We are very happy. We have often heard of the Chinese medicine, and it is a chance for us to try.
The team has also donated medicines worth more than $4,000 US to the locals in efforts to continue supporting the Senegalese long after the mission departs. Brian Toussaint, CGTN.
Coming up in your business news. South Africa's National Transport Movement signs a wage deal with South African Airways. And Kenya invests $30 million in a state housing plan.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London. China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
In your business news, South African Airways and the National Transport Movement Union have signed a wage deal for a 5.9% pay rise. The deal is expected to commence in the 2019-2020 financial year, starting in April. However, the deal is subject to the securing of additional funds by the airline. SAA has been facing cash shortages and a crippling strike that has entered its 8th day as workers demand wage increments. Recently, the Commission for Conciliation, Mediation and Arbitration ruled that 3 minority unions have the right to be included in any retrenchment discussions. 2 unions involved in the strike have already held talks with management to seek common ground. CGTN's Angelo Coppola has more.
Solidarity, AUSA and Satawu chose to go to the CCMA rather than have the airline interdicted in the courts because of time pressures.
We are going to allow a first sitting of the retrenchment process, and then we're hoping to achieve that. We'll try to put our facts in defense of the members. You will understand this process. The union must be given opportunity to represent and even to respond. And we are happy because in this process, that's where management will be forced by law to open their books in order for us to look at how they've been performing.
Regarding the restructuring and the possible retrenchments, we are still communicating with our members pertaining to that. We have our union representative, which is at site at present, and we are discussing the options with our members.
A day after Solidarity and its coalition partners won the CCMA ruling, the union called on the courts to place SAA in business rescue.
The time is running out for SAA. You need a radical, decisive intervention, otherwise everyone will lose. You've got 11,000 in the workforce of SAA. If we don't act swiftly, it all could be lost.
The airline simultaneously announced that it's suspending all of its services between Johannesburg and Hong Kong from 23 November to 14 December, citing the ongoing unrest in Hong Kong as the main reason for the suspension, providing more evidence that the airline was in trouble.
Now it's important for everyone to work together, and it's important for government and other stakeholders to approach us now to see how are we going to work with this process that has begun officially today.
The situation at SAA is precarious. While international flights are slowly resuming, the airline also announced that 2 of its more lucrative domestic routes would begin operating. But warnings have been issued that the unions and management have to find a solution to their impasse, as the National Treasury won't be bailing out the airline anytime soon. There simply isn't any money. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Kenya's government has provided a big boost for the informal sector, locally known as Juakali. This after placing a $30 million order for doors and windows. Through the State Department for Housing and Urban Development, the government is procuring 100,000 doors and 120,000 windows from the informal artisans for the affordable housing program. As part of the government's plan to create economic opportunities in the country, the Ministry of Transport, Infrastructure, Housing, Urban Development and Public Works are all urging the informal sector to look for opportunities as local content providers for the affordable housing program. The Juakali sector is a big contributor to employment in the country and a key enabler of the manufacturing sector. The ministry is asking the sector to form associations and register to provide construction components. Now, this week has seen the Global Business Forum Africa held in Dubai, with the 2019 event dubbed Scale Up Africa. CG10's Jacob Greaves has been looking at the burgeoning economic ties between the UAE and Africa.
The UAE wants to cash in on African opportunities. This is the 5th year this event has been running, and much talk has focused on untapping potential between the UAE and major cities in Africa. Dubai's Chamber of Commerce claims the UAE could be exporting around $3.6 billion more to African markets, but there's already firmly established ties. Events like this are an example of the growing importance Gulf countries place in Africa, in particular the likes of the UAE. If you just take Dubai as an example, its Chamber of Commerce has said non-oil trade with Africa between 2011 to 2019 is set to account for some $272 billion. It's a two-way flow, with African businesses also looking the other way. The UAE Africa Network has been running for around 3 years. It brings together entrepreneurs and businesses, and most recently hosted a fashion show in the shadows of Dubai's financial centre, showcasing design talent from Nigeria, Cameroon and Ghana.
There's a few examples where companies from South Africa has come into Dubai, set up their company and kind of redoing business in other parts of Africa. We've had companies from the US that have come in and been a part of the network, successfully launched in 3 or 4 African countries.
As for why, the UAE advertises itself as a regional hub, luring international firms with zero income tax and free zones to set up shop.
I've heard it been said that behind China, Dubai is probably the second place in the world where a lot of Africans come in to do business and re-export back to Africa. Also, Dubai is an easy place for African businesses to come in and set up their business, set up a branch of their business in Africa as well. Dubai has seen a significant growth in new African startups coming into Dubai, something like 47% over the last 2 years.
E-commerce firm Clickers is one company recently expanding into Dubai after beginning operations in Nigeria.
We set up in Dubai because Dubai is an international business hub, so it gives that credibility for both the vendors in Africa and the international community. But our main selling markets are actually in Europe and in America, because of the storyline we're telling about these African products and the fact that these are SMEs trying to sell their products outside, and Clickers gives them a window where their products can be available for people to buy.
Heavyweight UAE brands are also leaving a bigger footprint in Africa. Dubai-based port operator DP World has been pursuing a major expansion in Somaliland. The UAE government has become a major player in East Africa. For the oil-rich Gulf nation, growing commerce with Africa appears to be in vogue. Jacob Greaves, CGN in Dubai.
Now, the World Export Development Forum has discussed the possibility of having more African brands produced in different countries within the continent. African governments say manufacturing could grow faster if the products are sold in the African Continental Free Trade Area, an intra-Africa trade opportunity that will have a market of 1.2 trillion people. Colette Wanjoyi has more from Addis Ababa.
Ethiopia is setting up industrial parks like these for manufacturing of different products. So far, it has managed to attract foreign investors who are producing goods for export. The country says between July 2018 and March 2019, it collected $103 million in export earnings from these industrial parks. Other African countries attending the World Export Development Forum in Addis Ababa are looking to promote such manufacturing, but with African ownership. Ashish Thakar, who does phone manufacturing in Rwanda, says his business proves that Africans can manufacture anything.
Over the last 1 month, we have exported to over 43 countries. And the largest countries in terms of retail volume on maraphones.com, do you know what the top 5 countries are? Number 1 is Germany. Number 2 is the United Kingdom. Number 3 is the United States. Number 4 is Italy. And number 5 is Switzerland. These are 5 countries which is our highest sale volumes of Mara phones made in Africa.
But some delegates at this forum say the growth of manufacturing in the continent is slow, partly because Africans do not consume African products.
Buy local, buy Africa. That's the first part. So you need that patriotism, because even the you will not have an integrated economy when the development of our countries are still not at the same path.
The European Union currently enjoys a single market of 28 countries, but it is advising Africa's 54 countries to be ready to make compromises when the African Continental Free Trade Area comes into force next year.
60 years after, we are still battling with some of the impediment of the things that do not allow us
to really call saying that we have a truly perfectly functioning single market. We still need to make progress on fiscality. We still need to make progress in public procurement. Standards need to be modernized every time because things change.
But small enterprises have raised concerns that manufacturing plants on the continent exclude them. The small-scale entrepreneurs are asking African governments to strategize how they can be assisted to get partnerships that will propel their businesses to larger production and enable them to also enjoy more returns from the intra-African trade. The African Union is currently working on eliminating barriers to trade, like immigration restrictions and taxation within the continent. The AU hopes that this will make it easy for manufacturing and trade across borders after 2020. Coletta Wanjohi, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Well, that's where we leave your business news. Here's what's still ahead on the program. Coming up, Uganda hosts an exhibition in honor of the famous Italian artist Leonardo da Vinci.
Join us in global business and see Africa through our eyes.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
An exhibition in Uganda is featuring the works of one of the greatest painters of all time, Leonardo da Vinci. From this month until January next year, the Leonardo Opera Omnia in Uganda will display digitally reproduced works in celebration of Da Vinci, marking 500 years since his death. Leon Senyange has more.
The Uganda Museum is usually home to the country's history, but for the next 8 weeks, it will hold some of the most historic art pieces the world has ever seen, from the Mona Lisa to the Last Supper, all works of one true artistic genius, Leonardo da Vinci.
In a glimpse, actually, you will have the possibility to enjoy Leonardo, its philosophy, Italian Renaissance, and through that, understanding what is Italian culture.
Uganda and Ethiopia are the only two African countries that will play host to the Leonardo da Vinci Opera Omnia initiative. It's a celebration of the 500th anniversary of the death of a man described as a relentless observer of the natural world. Leonardo da Vinci's pieces are the biggest artworks ever mounted on the walls of this museum. For the art lovers that have come to see these famous works, this is not just an exhibition, but an unprecedented artistic experience. All of the 17 pieces on display are digitally reproduced, but the copies show every intricate brush stroke painted by Da Vinci. The detail is evident in his Virgin on the Rocks and Saint Jerome in the Desert.
When you stand next to such a work of perfection, there's another world it sort of takes you.
For the organizers, this is an opportunity for the local artists to be inspired.
When you compare with the Ugandans, also they're telling their local stories, our environment, their interpretation of the environment, their interpretation of culture, their interpretation of the political scene that is happening. Had Da Vinci been in our lifetime, he'll be telling the same stories.
While this is the closest many Ugandans will ever get to the real collections, every work of art here will leave an impression of the great master, Da Vinci. Leon Senyange, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
You're watching Africa Live, your sports news coming up next. In sports, South African teen Camden McClellan already a star in the motocross scene.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find